Good afternoon. How are you? Well, let's see. The weather, according to Thomas Jefferson, removed by some number of years into this agency relationship that I've created for him, says that our temperature is 78 and the humidity is 40% and the winds are at 5 miles an hour and there is no wind. So I don't know, but that's what Thomas says, and one can't knock Thomas, that's for sure. Those of you who, like myself, focus with restraint and the inner wisdom that I shouldn't be paying that much attention to this, has come to a point where there are objective reasons to think that, besides the one that you want to see a poll that shows, if you're like me, and I think you probably are since we're talking to each other, a supporter of Kamala and Tim. So two things have struck me in my thinking about the subject of polls. One is that some polls, including 538, do mix in the polls of those conducting these samples who have a bias. And that means there are a number of out-and-out Trump polls, and they seem to have blended, if you will, toward Trump. Now, I do know that people blend their wines so that they mix them and sell them, and that's not my thought of it, but you know, I don't drink that much wine, so I'm hardly an expert on it. But when it comes to polling, why do you and how do you possibly counteract a bias in a poll done by a Trump organization that you believe is biased and make it whole? I don't get that. So that's one thing. And I did see an explanation on 538, but no explanation how they could possibly cure that. So that's one of the things about polls. The other one is a new phrase that I hadn't seen before, and I think I saw it in the New York Times. It's called contactability. That is us reaching out, turning campaigning into a hunt for the independents. Now, I am not an independent voter in the sense that I'm a genetic Democrat. I support, however, with good reason in my opinion, and I'm talking about disciplined thinking, reason, issues, the character of the candidates, all of the above. And so I'm not an independent. I am a Democrat strongly. And so you don't have to hunt for me. I'm already there. And when somebody polls me, I don't answer, however small the poll may be, because I assume that polls are also a way to collect intelligence. You can't give a point of view about a race without then putting yourself on some list for good or bad. And so I don't do that. Now, a million years ago, when I ran for Congress, I did have polling volunteered for my campaign, and some of the endorsements supported it. That was an innocent time. There were push polls and other variations of the business back then. But it seemed almost innocent compared to what happens today with modern computers, algorithms, and all manner of mathematical devices. Still, I take heart from the fact when I look at the 538 poll, we have, for the nation, we have Kamala ahead. And like everybody else, I say, how could we be stuck in the battleground states so close to each other? So I do not believe that contactability means that there's a hunt for the independents. Of course, I won't know until Election Day what it does mean. And I'm sure that's what the candidates think as well. So I think that those who have said they're not looking at the polls, they're not listening to the noise, to the stories. They're doing the basic things, and that's what they're going to do. And Holly and I on election day will be covering a polling place not far from where we are. And it's to show the flag, and then some people do genuinely have questions. And so we'll answer those questions. And there'll be a sample ballot, and it will reflect both our local Senate race and congressional race, as well as the presidential, vice presidential slate. So that's one of the things that we'll do on election day. Between now and then, we may contribute more, we may make some calls, who knows. So if you can, do what you can. We all have other things in our way. Now, I have a couple of things that jump out at me that I think matter to us when we're considering the rightness of our cause and what we're up against at the same time. Talking about the same old bad guys. You've probably heard by now that Russia is spreading disinformation against Tim Walz. Outright lies, terribly painful, excruciating, false remarks. Now, I have a couple of views of that. One is it has to be suspicious to any thinking voter about this material coming out now, a couple of weeks before the election. And I would think, and again, it's hard to separate yourself from your belief system. But what I feel about how Tim Walz has conducted himself is that he has told people who he is, and he's credible. And now that we know that Russia's involved in this disinformation, we realize two things. One is that these guys cheat. We know that. It's another instance. It's a dangerous thing for a candidate to do close to election. So why are they doing it? They're doing it because they're running scared. Their polls must tell them Tim is dangerous to the Republican ticket, that he is, by contrast with Vance, the real deal, whereas Vance is a con man like Trump, his elder. So we have to think about these things for our neighbors, and we have to be aware that some are reading this stuff and believing it. I think it's probably down in the base, but this harkens back to the 2016 campaign, when the Russians helped Trump's campaign by spreading negative information against our candidate and tried to run down Clinton as much as they could. And they did, with some success. And they had spent years at it. They have not spent years going after Kamala or Tim. And I think that also favors our ticket and not theirs. Now, I heard on the air, and you would think that the commentators and the hosts would have this down. But I think they think it's better to ask a question than to have an opinion. And that's just not so. So, for example, they say things like, why does Trump favor these dictators? Are you kidding me? Like, what kind of brainless brainwave gets you to say something like that? Because he is a wannabe dictator. He thinks and acts like a dictator. And he is studying them as models for his own conduct. This is as bad as when he lies. They say, well, I wonder if he understood that what he said. Come on. Believe what you see and you hear. It's the old joke about you're going to believe your eyes and ears, or you're going to believe what I tell you. And Trump has said almost exactly that, laughing all the way to his theft of votes from people not intelligent enough to realize that the guy is having them, doing them. So we have to focus on the language we use. Now, I will not hold it against him what's happened to McDonald's, Because after he appeared and did his showboating Hollywood thing for whatever it was, 15 minutes, and had an interview, by the way, with a woman from South America who encouraged Trump to take care of such people should he win the election. Talking about a person who's lost to the reality of who Trump is. But anyhow, he was out there making quarter pounders or serving them with fries at the window to pre-selected individuals. What a case he is. Well, now we find out that there's E. coli, which is emanating from these quarter pounders, and 49 people have succumbed to it across 10 states. Now, if I remember correctly, Trump decided to put on this show of him as a faux McDonald's worker in Pennsylvania, which is not one of the states. But, you know, it's a kind of an interesting irony. Also, except in an emergency, when you feel that you're owed something that's fun for whatever happened to you that was not much fun. Or the reverse. You had such a good day, you say, oh, hell with it, I'm going to have a quarter pounder. Well, don't immediately right now, because things are going on. Those looking for the reckoning, okay, if it's not enough for you that Trump's been convicted of crimes, got judgments against him for fraud in his money transactions, for abuse of a woman, that he has criminal cases pending, that he's going to be sentenced later in November, no matter what happens on November the 5th. We see that there's a reckoning for what's going on. And Trump's Hail Mary pass is that if I get elected, somehow or other I can use the strength of office and as a dictator to wipe the slate clean. Maybe that's what he thinks. So let's look at how his pals are doing. We have Rudy has been kicked out of his expensive Madison Avenue apartment. The car that Lauren Bacall once owned, he's also losing that. He has managed to convince the court to believe that in 2018 he gave 3 World Series rings to his son, and for the time being that's not being taken away from him, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I have such trouble dealing with this in 2 senses. One is they can't do enough to Rudy for all that he's done to America in his support of Trump and these terrible values that they espouse and try to implement, and their effort to overthrow an election and now to put in place a dictator, okay? And the other part of me remembers him when we were in the Southern District of New York, and he was a hail fellow well met, I'm not exaggerating, and he was helpful to others. Where is that guy? And, you know, I suppose it's the old answer, and the answer is that power corrupts, and to get it, to have it, maybe you have to be corrupt, or some people have to be corrupt. And he took early on in his race to become mayor bigotry, and that was a surprise to us as well, I think. When I say us, anybody who knew Rudy in our younger years when we were cutting our teeth on how to prosecute a case. So that's terrible. And, you know, Trump, even as we wait for the election on November the 5th, is being told to tender the documents of what was going on in Arlington National Cemetery when he basically put together an ad in violation of the rules to respect the special feature that is Arlington National Cemetery for those who gave service and are buried there in honor. You know, but Trump thinks they're all fools, losers for having served our country. And, you know, I think of my dad and my uncle and other people I've known who served in World War II and others since. And I can't imagine how you would think and treat people that way, and how you could be the commander-in-chief if you think that way. Now, the Georgia Supreme Court, which is one of the heated battles going back to 2020 when Trump asked them to give him 11,000 plus votes that Biden won the state with, so that he plus one vote could win it instead. Well, they put people into the rules there who tried to make the rules difficult for the election day, and now the Georgia Supreme Court has rejected those rules again, saying they're not going to happen. I do have one note, and I don't intend to make it a strong one, because I'm very much in favor of Kamala and Tim, and I think that they have great promise for our nation when they win on November the 5th. But I'm more favored by her syncretism, meaning her comfort in several religions. But I would feel much better if I heard not a word of faith from or about her. Because faith in politics represents, in America, the reversal of Roe v. Wade. It speaks to how we treat those who are gay or LGBTQ, any one of these categories. It speaks against those who are dealing with gender issues. It is used to support abuse and bullying of children who have committed suicide because of their young nature and this terrible abuse. So, individual faith is one thing. You can do whatever you want. But I think public expressions by a political figure of faith betray so many people and should be minimized or not done at all. Now, I've appeared in Baptist churches and other churches on behalf of candidates, but there's never been a time like now when there are some faux Christians who want our nation to follow in the steps of Great Britain or India or Pakistan or any of these countries in which religion is a destroyer of life and society. Look at the Middle East, what's going on. So, anyhow, I chide those who bring up faith in the middle of this election. And I know some are manipulating it, and I guess that's fine, but it's a two-edged sword, and we should be more careful. What happens between now and the election is we do what we can. And it's to follow the story of the campaign, to try to persuade people by what we observe and hear and learn that justifies us going with Kamala and Tim. And they may be the best choices we've had for many a year. And we have to celebrate it by electing them and giving them the chance to repair America and to lead us to a new era of good government that represents all the people, that reflects equal justice before law, that reflects our voice in government. And we're going to have to clean house as to certain elected representatives that are not aboard with that. And when I say it, I'm not talking about the enemy within. I'm talking about those cowardly who did nothing despite having the tools to stop Trump in 2 impeachments, in courts, in prosecutions, and other things. But right now, we got a battle to win, and I expect we will. So, be of good cheer, and if I can, I'll get out tomorrow and be among my trees here, my cathedral of trees, and I look forward to talking to you then. All the best. Bye-bye.